Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to Guys at Magic. This is Hunter and David. Say what up, David.
Yeah, what's going on?
We are back. This time, we're taking a look at the $100 upgrade to Food and Fellowship. That is the Precon deck from the newest set, Lord of the Rings, Tales from Middle-earth. David, you had the opportunity to take $100 and make this deck better. First and foremost, let's talk about the deck itself and what you're doing with the commanders.
Yeah. So the deck straight out of the box is designed to be run with two commanders, actually. So there's partner pairings in the deck. The face ones, or I guess the ones that really kind of incentivizes you to play with, are Frodo and Sam. Of course, there's Merry and Pippin in the deck as well. And then there's also Bilbo in this list. So you technically have, tons of different choices as to what you want to lead the deck with. For the $100, I did decide to keep with Frodo and Sam. And before we kind of dive in with those, I do think it's really important that we also talk about one of the mechanics from the set, because this is really what the deck cares about really entirely. And that being the ring and the ring tempting you. So with this deck, we're playing around with the ring, and the ring is kind of like an emblem that hangs out in the command zone or outside the game. Anyways, though, it's got a couple different modes on it. So whenever you first have the ring tempt you, it says that you're going to choose a ring bearer. The ring bearer is legendary and can't be blocked by creatures with greater power. On the second mode, so the second time that you've been tempted, it says whenever your ring bearer attacks, draw a card, then discard a card. The third time, it says whenever your ring bearer becomes blocked by a creature, that creature's controller sacrifices it at the end of combat. And then the fourth and final mode on the ring says that whenever your ring bearer deals combat damage to a player, each opponent loses 3 life. So this is really weird because the ring tempting you never goes down. So if you've been tempted, say, for example, 3 times earlier on in the game, you're going to continue to have that 3 temptations over the course of the entirety of the game. The other thing being is that anytime that the ring tempts you, you can actually choose a different ring bearer. So the ring can kind of play like hot potato amongst your own field. So it kind of bounces around a lot. So it does keep all of those modes. It keeps, say, for example, if you're on the 3rd temptation, it'll have the 1st and 2nd temptation still listed on there too. So there's a lot that the ring is going to be able to do, and it's going to have to really beef up a lot of our creatures.
Yeah, the stacking of the ring seems very good. Throwing out one creature, very hard to deal with. Don't forget all those triggers.
Yeah, absolutely not. You're definitely going to want to be playing around with the actual physical card for the ring to make sure that you're keeping track of all of these extra abilities that the creature is going to be gaining.
Well, that's great. You said you were going to go with Frodo and Sam. You want to say what they do?
Yeah. So Frodo is Frodo Adventurous Hobbit. For a white and a black, you get a legendary creature, Halfling Scout. It's a 1/3, and it has partner with Sam. It also has vigilance and says whenever it attacks, if you gain 3 or more life this turn, the ring tempts you. Then, if Frodo is your ring bearer and the ring has tempted you 2 or more times this game, draw a card. So pretty low to the ground, very small, kind of fits for the halfling theme. However, it does a really good job of being able to proc us with tempting for the ring. So Frodo is going to be one of those cards that we're going to want to get out as early as possible. And he does also further reward us with that card advantage by being our ring bearer.
Yeah, absolutely. And just having that staple on that says if it's tempted you 2 or more times this entire game, you draw a card, that's always going to trigger because it never goes down.
Yep. The other card that we're going to be playing with for our commander is Sam Loyal Attendant. He is 1, a green, and a white for a total of 3 mana. Legendary creature, Halfling Peasant. He's a 2/4, and he has partner with Frodo. He also says at the beginning of combat on your turn, create a food token. Then, activated abilities of foods you control cost 1 less to activate. So he kind of gives you those artifact tokens for you to be able to then pay a mana, gain 3 life, which will then proc Frodo and have the ring tempt you.
Yeah, seems really good. I'm excited to see what you do with this.
Yeah, we're going to be wading into battle with a sword and a frying pan, and we're going to be cooking up some tasty brews.
Perfect. Well, let's get into the additions, David. I want to see what you threw in to make this deck really hum.
All right, so in order to make this deck really work, we wanted to include as many cards that either made food, took advantage of food, or had something to do with the ring tempting us. So with that being said, the vast majority of my upgrades are actually going to be coming from this set, which I think is really cool. If you're a big fan of the Lord of the Rings, there's a lot for us to work with here. I don't necessarily think that this is going to be like the most powerful $100 build out of the box or anything like that, but this deck is designed to be quite a bit of fun, and I think it's definitely going to accomplish that. With that being said, the first card that we're going to throw in here is Lotho, Corrupt Sheriff. He is a white and a black for 2 mana. It's a legendary creature, halfling rogue. It's a 2/1 and says whenever a player casts their second spell each turn, you lose 1 life and create a treasure token. This is really important for us because that treasure token is going to help us out with any kind of like ramp or mana fixing. The other thing here being too is that we don't really care if we're losing 1 life for this ability because this deck makes a ton of food, so we'll be netting all that life back. Smeagol Helpful Guide is 1, a black, and a green for a legendary creature, Halfling Horror. It is a 4/2 and says at the beginning of your end step, if a creature died under your control this turn, the ring tempts you. It also says whenever the ring tempts you, target opponent reveals cards from the top of their library until they reveal a land card. Put the card onto the battlefield tapped under your control, and the rest into their graveyard. Kind of mills our opponent a little bit, kind of also helps us to ramp, and then does a really good job of not only being able to provide an additional ring temptation, but also procking on that too. So Smeagol is pretty powerful. Delighted Halfling is a single green mana for a creature Halfling Citizen. It's a 1/2 that you can tap to add a colorless, or you can tap it to add 1 mana of any color. Spend this mana only to cast a legendary spell, and that spell can't be countered. There are a ton of legendary creatures in the Lord of the Rings, and a lot of our upgrades, at least on the creature front, are legendary creatures. So Delighted Halfling continues to work really well here. Also in playtesting, if you do manage to get this out maybe on turn 1, it does smooth out the curve a little bit. That way, whenever you drop Sam on turn 3, you do have an extra mana up to then use his food token. One of my favorite inclusions here is Peregrine Took. This is 2 and a green for a total of 3 mana. It's a legendary creature, Halfling Citizen. It's a 2/3 and says if 1 or more tokens would be created under your control, those tokens plus an additional food token are created instead. He also says you can sacrifice 3 foods and draw a card. So with this card in play, so long as it's just chilling there and we have Sam, every time we go to combat, we'll make 2 foods. And then we have Samwise Gamgee. This is a green and white for 2 mana. It's a legendary creature, Halfling Peasant. It's a 2/2 and says whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, create a food token. And you can sacrifice 3 foods to return target historic card from your graveyard to your hand. So that works with all of the legendary creatures that we have in this deck.
Yeah, I would have thought all of these halflings fit very well in the halfling deck.
I know, very straightforward, but you know what? I love the themes here, and I love that we're able to fit so many more Lord of the Rings cards into the list.
Yeah, not only are they fantastic in the deck itself, I think all 5 of these cards that we just talked about are really good on their own. So those are all the halflings. What else are we throwing in that are not so much halflings?
Well, this is a deck that is all based around the ring and the ring tempting us. So of course we have to have a card that like actually wants to go find the ring, and that being the Witch King of Angmar. This is 3 and 2 black for a legendary creature, Wraith Noble. It's a 5/3 with flying. It says whenever 1 or more creatures deal combat damage to you, each opponent sacrifices a creature that dealt combat damage to you this turn. The ring tempts you. It also says you can discard a card and give it indestructible until end of turn, tap it. So another really powerful card here. This one in the air, being a 5-power creature, is going to be able to put in some work. It also benefits us with being able to tempt us with the ring. And then lastly, I mean, not many of our opponents are going to want to attack us with that ability in play. We do have a couple of other creatures included in this list. Sadly, couldn't fit all Lord of the Rings in, so I do have a couple of cards that just generally I felt worked really well. The first one here being Veto, Thorn of the Dusk Rose. This is 2 and a black for a total of 3 mana. It's a legendary creature, Vampire Cleric. It's a 1/3 and says whenever you gain life, target opponent loses that much life. And it also has an ability where you can pay 3 and 2 black and says creatures you control gain lifelink until end of turn. So really punish our opponent with all the life we're going to be gaining. Kill him with food.
Kill him with some food. I like that.
We also have Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, in this list. This is 1 and white for a legendary creature, Human Soldier. It is a 2/1 with first strike and says non-creature spells cost 1 more to cast. This deck is very heavy with creatures, and most of our creatures are pretty low to the ground. With that being said, Thalia provides kind of an interesting angle in that she helps to slow our opponents down. That way, some of our smaller creatures, like our 1/3 commander, can get in before our opponents start putting up walls. Marionette Master is 4 and 2 black for a creature human artificer. It is a 1/3 with Fabricate 3. For those of you who don't remember, it says whenever this creature enters the battlefield, you can put 3+1/+1 counters on it, or you create 3 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature tokens. It then says whenever an artifact you control is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, target opponent loses life equal to Marionette Master's power. So if we chose to put all 3 of the +1/+1 counters on Marionette Master, anytime we sack a food, we'll be able to hit an opponent for 4.
Yeah, I have a feeling you're going to be doing the counter thing more than the servo artifacts.
More than likely, in the case that I'm doing the servo thing, it probably means that I don't have a board state and I'm panicking. We also have Mother of Runes in this list. For a single white mana, we get a human cleric. She's a 1/1, and it says tap target creature you control gains protection of the color of your choice until end of turn. Actually, really important that we keep our commanders alive, and especially kind of oddly enough, Sam, because he is our main food producer for this list. Um, of all the things that the ring does, it doesn't provide any kind of protection.
Yeah, Mother of Runes fits into anything that is running white.
And then lastly, we have two more creature cards that I want to talk about, and these probably being the most important creature includes that we're going to talk about. The first one being Academy Manufacturer. For 3 mana, you get an artifact creature, Assembly Worker. It's a 1/3, and it says if you would create a clue, food, or treasure token, instead create one of each. So really powerful with this list. Anytime that we go to combat with Sam, we'll make a food, and then that'll also make a clue and a treasure. Assembly Manufacturer gets out of control pretty much immediately.
Yeah, we've seen Academy Manufacturer go off in our last Precon battle. You absolutely went nuts with it.
This time around, though, I have something to do with the food, so I'm excited for this. We also are going to be throwing in Chatterfang, Squirrel General. Bet you didn't know this little squirrel also helped fight off Mordor. This is 2 and a green for a legendary creature, Squirrel Warrior. It's a 3/3 with Forest Walk, and it says if one or more tokens would be created under your control, those tokens plus that many 1/1 green squirrel creature tokens are created instead. It also has an ability where you can pay a black and sacrifice X squirrels. Target creature gets plus X minus X until end of turn. So a really, really powerful token producer, and then also kind of a pseudo removal and pseudo pump effect that we have stapled onto this card too.
Yeah, I would have thought squirrels and halflings go so well together.
I mean, they both care about nuts.
I guess halflings care about nuts.
Yep, there we go.
So, was that all the creatures?
That was all the creatures. We've done quite a bit of a makeover with this list.
All right, well, let's move on to some of the non-creature spells.
All right, so moving over to the non-creatures, we have a list of instants and sorceries. The first one that I threw in here is Many Partings. This is a single green mana for a sorcery, and it says search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle, and create a food token. I just love this card. This is from the Lord of the Rings set. It does everything that we want it to do. It doesn't necessarily ramp us, but I mean, it'll help us to fix our mana so we can go grab whatever basic land we don't have access to, whatever color. And then it makes a food token, and my favorite part is you can do this on turn 1.
Yeah, it's a very good early access card.
Also, Bombadil's Song is 1 and a green for a total of 2 mana. It's an instant and says target creature you control gets +1/+1 and gains hexproof until end of turn, and the ring tempts you. So it'll help to save our commander if we need it. It helps to pump one of our creatures, and it also procs our, it procs a lot of our deck as well with the ring tempting us. So, of course, we are going to be playing white in this list, so that means we got to pump up our removal. We did already have Swords of Plowshares with brand new art in this deck, which is amazing, but sadly we didn't have Path to Exile, so we're going to be throwing that in. For a single white mana, you get an instant that says Exile target creature. Its controller may search their library for a basic land card, put that card onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle.
You can go out and get the Lord of the Rings art for this card too, which exists because it was in the Riders of Rohan deck.
Yeah, it's such a bummer that it wasn't included in here as well. I would have loved some Hobbit theme Path to Exile. The Battle of Bywater is one of my favorite cards from the Lord of the Rings set. This is 1 and 2 white for a total of 3 mana. It's a sorcery that says destroy all creatures with power 3 or greater, then create a food token for each creature you control. I cannot stress how much I love this card and how much work this thing does for this deck.
Yeah, it's a very good board wipe for low to the ground tribal, which is
I mean,
exactly what halflings are.
it's fantastic. Blow up all of your opponent's creatures, don't touch your board, and make a ton of food. We also are going to be throwing in Ascend from Avernus. This is X and 3 white. It's a sorcery. It says return all creatures and planeswalker cards with mana value of X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. You then exile Ascend from Avernus. Most of our creatures only cost maybe 1, 2, or 3 mana, so Ascend from Avernus can get a whole bunch of our creatures back from the graveyard directly into play for relatively cheap.
So those are all the instants and sorceries. What are we doing in the enchantment department?
We have 3 enchantments we're going to be including in this list, the first of which is Call of the Ring. This is 1 and a black for an enchantment. It says at the beginning of your upkeep, the ring tempts you. It then says whenever you choose a creature as your ring bearer, you may pay 2 life. If you do, draw a card. Card draw, like I mentioned earlier on, the paying 2 life or paying any amount of life really doesn't matter so much because we have so many foods lying around. And then also being able to proc us with the ring tempting us every single turn, this card is super pushed. We're also going to be throwing in Shortcut to Mushrooms. This is 1 and a green for an enchantment. It says whenever it enters the battlefield, the ring tempts you. It then says at the beginning of your end step, if a permanent you control left the battlefield this turn, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Food are those wonderful permanents, so we're going to be able to go ahead, sacrifice, and then capitalize on this later on by getting a +1/+1 counter on a creature.
Yeah, not too bad when you pay, gain 3 life, put a counter on something.
Now, the next include is a little bit of a weird one, and let me go ahead and explain why I threw this in here. So, the ring does a lot for us, but the third mode on the ring is a little bit weird. It says whenever a ring bearer becomes blocked by a creature, that creature's controller sacrifices it at the end of combat. Now, the odd thing here being is that the other modes on the ring kind of incentivize for you to put it on a small creature that's going to be able to slip through and get damage in. But if we wanted to put it on a creature that maybe has to be blocked, our opponents are going to be in quite a bit of trouble, which is why we're going to be including Lure in this list. Lure is an enchantment that costs 1 and 2 green for a total of 3 mana. It says enchant creature, and it says all creatures able to block the enchanted creature do so. And so long as that was our ring bearer on the third mode, they'll then have to sacrifice all of their creatures that blocked, which should have been all of them.
Yeah, that's really mean. Don't do that to me.
We'll see how the game turns out.
Did we touch the mana base at all in the deck?
We absolutely did touch the mana base. This could not be a Hobbit deck, or I'm sorry, a Halfling deck, without throwing in the Shire. So we do include that. That's a legendary land. It says it enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a legendary creature. It taps for a green mana. You can also pay 1 and a green, tap it, and tap an untapped creature you control to create a food token.
Yeah, I don't know why this wasn't included in the deck itself.
It's just so on theme.
It really is.
We did also want to touch on the mana base just a little bit. I did throw in all 3 of the applicable pathways, and that being Branchcloth pathway, Brightclimb pathway, and Darkboar pathway. All 3 of these cards, the way that they work is you can either play them on their front half for 1 color of mana or on the back half for the other color of mana that they produce, just to help fix up our mana by a little bit. And then I'm going to be throwing in 2 Pain lands here as well. Caves of Koilos and Llanowar Wastes. Caves of Koilos can tap for a white or a black, but if you do, it'll deal 1 damage to you. You can also tap for a colorless and it won't hurt you. Llanowar Waste, you can tap it for either a black or a green and it'll deal 1 damage to you, or you can tap it for a colorless and it won't hurt you at all. Our deck is really important that we be able to have access to all 3 colors of mana by turn 3, that allowing us to be able to get both of our commanders in play, and that really helping our deck run most efficiently. So I love the mana fixing here. The last thing here being is we did kind of skew the color base of this deck, so I am going to be throwing in 2 basic swamps.
All right. Seems like you fixed up the mana base. Is that going to be it for all of your additions?
That is it for all of the additions.
All right. Now the sad part. We got to take all the really cool art from Lord of the Rings out of the deck. What are we removing?
So, I do think it's really cool that they included a lot of the tree folk, a lot of the Ents in this list. However, I felt for the most part, they didn't really fit. They don't necessarily do a whole lot of what our deck wants to do, or if they do, they're really expensive. Now, I get it, yes, they're big smashy creatures and they may be better in the late game, but for the most part, I'm just trying to be able to push through in small increments of damage and then be able to kind of outgrind my opponents, and that's kind of the game plan here. I don't really need the big smashy. So with that being said, the first card we're going to get rid of is Woodfall Primus. This is 5 and 3 green for a total of 8 mana. It's a Tree Folk Shaman. It's a 6/6 with Trample and says whenever it enters the battlefield, destroy target non-creature permanent. It also has Persist, allowing it to come back if it's died. 8 mana is just an absolute ton, especially in a deck like this. Like most of our creatures only cost like 3 or fewer mana, so this just I felt was too expensive. Orchard Strider is 4 and 2 green for a Tree Folk. It's a 6/4, and it says whenever it enters the battlefield, create 2 food tokens. It also has basic land cycling for 1 and a green. The 2 food tokens is great, and it is on theme for the deck, but I don't necessarily want a creature with just an ETB to make food on turn 6. We have a lot of other small creatures that generate food or are just food token engines that I felt like were much better. The last one here being Generous Ent. This is 5 and a green for a creature tree folk with reach. It is a 5/7 and says whenever it enters the battlefield, create a food token, and it has forest cycling. So very similar to the last card we just talked about.
I can understand why you cut all these. These are definitely not halfling, and they're definitely not going to fit inside the deck that you're running low to the ground. However, Generous Ent found the squirrels you were making.
Yeah, there you go. I guess in this art they care about apples.
What else are we cutting out?
So I also thought it was really cool that in the food and fellowship list they decided to include some of the eagles. Um, just not these eagles. So the first one being Eagles of the North. This is 5 and a white for a creature bird soldier. It's a 3/3 with flying and says whenever it enters the battlefield, creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain first strike until end of turn, and has plane cycling for a single mana. 6 mana for a 3/3 flyer is bad. And the one-time anthem effect, although that's cool, does not pump enough to warrant this card being in the list. The other eagle that we're going to be cutting here is Landroval, Horizon Witness. This is 4 and a white for a total of 5 mana. It's a legendary creature, Bird Noble. It's a 3/4 with flying and says whenever 2 or more creatures you control attack a player, target attacking creature without flying gains flying until end of turn. The evasion here doesn't really make a whole lot of sense for me because the ring gives evasion. So I would rather focus more on that than a 5 mana 3/4 flyer.
That makes sense to me.
So sadly, both of the eagles, we let them fly off here.
Fly, eagle, fly.
One of the cards that I did cut from here, the last creature that we're going to talk about, and sadly a card that I really wanted to continue to include in this list is Prize Pig. This is 1 and a green for a total of 2 mana. It's a creature boar. It is a 0/3 and says whenever you gain life, put that many ribbon counters on Prize Pig. Then if there are 3 or more ribbon counters on Prize Pig, remove those counters and untap it. And you can tap it and add 1 mana of any color. I think it's really weird here that you can continue to tap the pig. I know that makes it a better card, but I feel like it's a prized pig because you're probably going to eat it, and I feel like you should sacrifice it. But I don't know. That's just my own little critique there.
Yeah, it's a weird card. It's a bummer that if you have 3 or more, like if you have more than 3 ribbons, you have to get rid of all the ribbons. So
Yeah. I mean, it's a neat effect. It's just that
he's a prize pig, but he's
he's a
not here
prize.
for this prize.
Nope.
So that's all the creatures. We added some instants and sorceries. What are the instants and sorceries that we're taking out?
All right, so the first card we're going to talk about here is Harmonize. This is two green for a total of 4 mana. It says draw 3 cards. This is generally just not a very good card. I actually don't like Harmonize, and I typically cut it from most of my lists. There are better card draw engines out there. There are better card draw options and engines already included in this list. So Harmonize, it just felt like was a pretty easy cut. Next up here is Fumigate. This is 3 and 2 white for a sorcery. It says destroy all creatures. You gain 1 life for each creature destroyed this way. My reasoning for this one is simple. I included the Battle of Bywater, which I think is just way better in this list, and I wanted to get rid of another board wipe. That way we didn't go like super heavy with them, and Fumigate was just the other board wipe. I don't know. It was the worst of the other board wipes. Sylvan Offering is X and a green for a sorcery. It says choose an opponent. You and that player each create an XX green tree folk creature token. It also says choose an opponent. You and that player each create X 1/1 green elf warrior creature tokens. I don't care about elves. I don't really care about tree folk, and I most certainly do not care about making my opponents have those too. I'm not here to play politics, and this card really doesn't do much for me.
I would remove this card as well.
We're also going to be cutting Crypt Incursion. I feel like this was, I don't know. I feel like this honestly was a card that was included to like fight up against one of the other precons. Crypt Incursion is 2 and a black for an instant. It says exile all creature cards from target player's graveyard. You gain 3 life for each creature card exiled this way. It's a way for us to gain life, but so does our commander do that, and they don't have to take up an additional card in our deck. So Crypt Incursion, sure, it's graveyard removal. It's so very narrow and specific here. It's not doing it for me. And then lastly, the final instant or sorcery that we're going to be cutting from this list is Mortify. This is 1, a white, and a black for an instant. It says destroy target creature or enchantment. My reasoning for this one is we included Path to Exile, and I just feel like Path to Exile is better than Mortify.
Yeah, it really is. I know we didn't really add any artifacts to the deck, but are you removing some?
I am going to be cutting a couple of artifacts from this list. The first two artifacts I'm going to talk about, I know that I'm probably going to get some flack for, but we got to talk about them anyways. The first card that I removed here is Commander Sphere. This is 3 mana for an artifact. It says tap, add 1 mana to your mana pool of any color in your commander's color identity. You can also sacrifice it and draw a card. Our commanders cost 2 and 3. Commander Sphere is not going to help us ramp into them. Generally speaking, I don't like to include 3 mana artifact ramp. And Commander Sphere being the same, if not more expensive than our commanders, it's not doing it for me. We really want our ramp to be able to come down ASAP in a list like this, especially since our creatures are so small and so cheap. As well as that, we also have Pristine Talisman. This is 3 mana for an artifact. You can tap to add a colorless, and you gain 1 life. That is a really, really neat effect in a dedicated life gain list. However, our deck specifically cares about gaining 3 life. This does not gain us 3 life. This actually does not do what the deck wants to do. We would need 3 of these in order for our Frodo to care, and we only have 1.
Yeah, I can understand why you cut these two.
The artifact that I'm going to be most sad about removing from the list is Field Tested Frying Pan. This is 2 and a white for an artifact equipment. It says whenever it enters the battlefield, you create a food token, then you create a 1/1 halfling creature token and attach the field tested frying pan to it. It also says that the equipped creature has whenever you gain life, this creature gets +X until end of turn, where X is the amount of life you've gained, and it's got an equip cost of 2. Through playtesting with this, I have felt for the most part that we really only have like maybe 1 food in play at a time. Generally, this deck doesn't actually stockpile them very well because we do have a couple of other ways that we're going to consume them. The field testing frying pan doesn't actually provide as much of a pump as what I would like. It also is kind of really weird because with our ring bearers being tempted, we kind of initially want them to be small, which field tested frying pan doesn't do. Now, later on in the game, of course, we do want them to be big, so it kind of works in that avenue. This was a card I was just really on the fence for, and I had to make one final cut, and this was the last one I removed.
Yeah, it makes sense too, because it also doesn't do anything if you don't gain life. So,
I mean, it
I
does
get-
make a food and a creature for us.
yeah, but then it just sits there.
True. We're going to be removing Trading Post from this list as well. This is 4 mana for an artifact that you can pay 1, tap it, discard a card, and gain 4 life. Pay 1, tap it, pay 1 life to create a 0/1 white goat creature token. Pay 1, tap it, sacrifice a creature, return a target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. Or pay 1, tap it, sacrifice an artifact, draw a card. Trading Post is actually fairly decent in this list whenever it comes to that last mode of being able to sacrifice our food to draw cards. But I do prefer most of the time sacrificing them to then tempt us with the ring, just because that I do believe gives us a little bit more flexibility. Even in the case we've been tempted 4 times, that allows us to still be able to like move the ring around, which I feel like is really important in this list. So Trading Post, another card that's very flexible and does provide a lot of really solid just power for the deck. It was just another card that I needed to make room for, and another one that I did end up cutting. And then the last card that I removed from our artifact list is Hithlane Rope. This is 2 mana for an artifact. It says it cannot be sacrificed. You pay 1 and tap it to search your library for a basic land card. Put it on the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. Then the player to your right gains control of this card. You can also pay 2, tap it, draw a card, and then the player to your right gains control of this card. No, this card is bad. Don't play this card. This is not a group hub deck.
Those removals make sense when it comes to the artifact department, but you also added some enchantments. What are some enchantments that you've taken out?
So we did cut 2 enchantments here. The first one, sadly, I am going to be removing it, and I've got to say, this has some really cool artwork. This is Assemble the Entmoot. This is 3 and a green for a total of 4. It says creatures you control have reach. It also says that you can sacrifice this enchantment, create 3 tapped XX green treefolk creature tokens, where X is the amount of life you gain this turn, and then you put a reach counter on each of them. Assuming that you've gained 3 life with a food, you're going to create 3 3/3s, which is pretty solid. I mean, that is 9 power. I just felt like this card really wasn't doing a whole lot for me. I don't really care much about the tree folks, and for the most part, I'm probably going to be using those food for something else. I will, however, say that like if you want to continue to include this card in your list, I don't think you're making a mistake there. Also, like I mentioned earlier, I love the artwork. It I don't know the int there that's kind of like in the middle that looks like it's the Grinch who stole Christmas. Um, is super cool.
Goodbye, Ents.
And then we are also going to be removing of herbs and stewed rabbit. This is 2 and a white for a total of 3 mana. It's an enchantment saga. On the first mode, it says put a +1/+1 counter on up to one target creature, create a food token. The second mode says draw a card and create a food token. And then the third mode says create a 1/1 white halfling creature token for each food you control. It's just kind of slow, and I don't really think it does enough.
Yeah, flavor-wise, it's amazing because all the hobbits are showing up when there's food, but it's a little slow.
Yeah. Flavor wise, it's stewed rabbit.
It's stewed rabbit. And of course, you did add some lands to fix the mana base. I'm assuming you took some lands out as well.
We did. In fact, we're actually going to be cutting a couple more than what we added in. We did lower the mana cost of the deck just in general. Turns out halflings are pretty cheap. So, with that being said, we're going to be cutting a couple cards. For the most part, these cards we're going to be removing are just generally slow. And with our commander costing 2 or 3, we need those to come out untapped. The first card here is Canopy Vista. This is land that is both a forest and a plain, so you can tap it for either a green or a white, and it says it enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more basic lands. Having this drop on turn 3 is just so soul crushing for this deck that I just had to remove it. The next 3 cards that I'm going to talk about are all part of a cycle. This is Fortified Village, Necroblossom Snarl, and Shine Shadow Snarl. The way that these cards work is that they enter the battlefield tapped unless you reveal one of the 2 basic lands that they care about. They tap for a green white, green black, or a white black, respectively. Just from playtesting, I felt like for the most part, these cards were not doing it for me. Most of the time, they were entering in tapped, and that's just not okay in a list like this. You really need those untapped lands. We also have Grey Pelt Refuge and Scoured Barrens that we're going to be removing. This, once again, being part of a cycle. They enter the battlefield tapped always, 100% of the time. They say they gain you 1 life whenever they enter the battlefield, and then they can tap for 1 mana of 2 different colors. Grey Pelt Refuge will tap for either a green or a white, and Scoured Barrens will tap for either a white or a black. I hate everything about these cards. They enter the battlefield tapped. They don't gain us enough life for me to care. No.
Goodbye.
We are also going to be cutting Evolving Wilds from this list. Evolving Wilds is land that you can tap it, sack it, go search your library for a basic land, put it on the battlefield tapped. Same kind of thing. Evolving Wilds is basically just a tapped land. Now, given that it is whatever basic land that you need coming in tapped, but still, it's just we need those that good mana base. And then the last non-basic here being Ash Barrens. This is a land that you can tap for a colorless, and you can also cycle it away for 1 mana for basic land cycling. We're playing a 3-color list in which we need all 3 colors on turn 3. So Ash Barrens was just not good enough here. To wrap this up, we did cut this list by 2 forests. I just felt like with us removing the cards that we did and adding in the other cards that we had, we kind of shifted this deck to being more black focused than green focused. So with that being said, that's why I included the 2 swamps earlier.
That makes a lot of sense to me. And is that going to do it? Is that all of your upgrade?
That is all of my upgrade. I apologize. I know that there are a ton of cards that I included and decided to cut from this list, both directions there. Turns out Lord of the Rings prices are very much so fluctuating right now. Putting this list together for $100 and including almost half the cards from my upgrades coming from the set, that made this kind of challenging. A lot of the cards are either really, really cheap because they're commons and uncommons that happen to work really well with the list, or they're rares that are just kind of like bouncing all over the place in terms of price right now.
Well, speaking about price, we gave you $100. What was the total amount of your additions?
This came to $95 whenever I made it. However, it would not surprise me if it's gone plus or minus by about $10 in either direction at this point.
I'm going to go ahead and assume that it went minus because the set's coming out fairly soon, and usually we see pre-order prices are a little more expensive than the actual set prices. But who knows?
Yep. So if anything, this might be a little bit of a cheaper upgrade. If you got $100 to spare, you might be able to throw in a little bit of extra stuff in here too.
Mm-hmm. And any final comments about the deck itself, David, before we wrap things up?
I do think that this deck is a ton of fun. I'm very excited to play this for a Precon battle. I don't necessarily think it's going to be like as pushed to the limit as some of the other decks that we're going to see in there, but I mean, for it being kind of like a halfling tribal deck, it's doing exactly what I wanted to do. I think this deck is a ton of fun. Um, so yeah, really excited with this.
That's awesome. And if you guys wanted to see the full deck, check the description where you'll find a link to the Mox Field where you can go ahead and play test it yourself. Click the link, check out the whole deck. Also, while you're down there, leave a comment. Let us know what you think about this upgrade. Did David do a good job? Do you think he should have added something that you liked as well? Let us know. And like the video if you liked it. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Also, in the description, you'll find links to our Instagram, our Twitter, and our TikTok. That is at Guys That Magic for each one. Follow us on all of those to keep up to date with all the other things that we're doing. And until the next video, hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Peace.
Peace.